Hey guys, Trey here. Wanted to do another forecasting discussion for today's slight risk we have for the southern Texas Panhandle into western Oklahoma. Looks to be a pretty potent setup for at least for March standards. 5% tornado risk surrounded by a 2% there, with the main corridor from about Lubbock to about Altus, Oklahoma. And then wind damage threat as well, and a hail threat, including a threat for significant, very large hail from that kind of same corridor from Lubbock to Altus. So let's go ahead and get started here. Take a look at what we're seeing. This is the satellite image, infrared satellite image. We can see this counterclockwise spin here over the desert southwest. That is our main focus, main trough. We can see southwesterly flow traversing sort of the southern Rockies here. Lots of clouds across the region. If we zoom in here, let's actually go to subregional sectors if we can. Take the sort of Amarillo sector. We see quite a few clouds here. Switch to the visible view. Pretty socked in clouds here across the region. So that is a concern for later today. I do think we'll get some breaks in the clouds as the day progresses. I don't think it's going to stay socked in clouds like this. And this is kind of sort of north of the warm front here. If we go south one, we see some breaks here. Still quite a few clouds across the region. So going to need some breaks in the clouds today to get things going. Get that sunshine down to the surface. Speaking of the surface, this is the current surface map. We can see southerly flow across much of Texas here. To the sort of south of this front that's kind of stalled out here, you can see the sort of northeasterly winds right in the northern half of Oklahoma. Southerly winds to the south of that. So there's a front draped kind of in this region, sort of from, say, Oklahoma City, south of Childress, over toward about Lubbock. This front is going to retreat to the north a little bit as a warm front as the day progresses, probably stalling somewhere in the southeast Texas Panhandle into southwest Oklahoma vicinity. And where that connects with the dry line, going to be a fairly diffuse dry line. But we see 60s dew points streaming up here into the Texas South Plains with that southerly flow. There's going to be a dry line that sets up somewhere here, somewhere near the Texas-New Mexico border, maybe a little bit to the east into the Texas Panhandle, Texas South Plains. And where that front and the dry line intersect, somewhere here in the southern Panhandle, is going to be our best bet at getting enough forcing to get storms to go. And if we take a look at our 500 millibar map here, we see our trough located over Southern California. Very potent closed circulation here with a jet max rotating around the bottom of that circulation. But we see ridging here, some minor ridging here in the plains, and that's not going to change a whole lot throughout the day. This trough is not really going to be ejecting into the plains until overnight tonight into tomorrow, Saturday. So we're going to be kind of stuck in this sort of phase right before the trough ejects, where we're going to need some mesoscale factors to get storms to go and break the cap. Because we're not really going to have that large-scale synoptic forcing, per se, to drive storm formation here. So we're going to need that dry line triple point sort of, that dry line cold front or warm front sort of triple point, where our upward motion's maximized, where those two fronts connect. And also, what's going to help us here is the cap rock. So just for those of you who aren't familiar, the cap rock is this geological sort of formation here. The Llano Estacado, the eastern side of that's called the Cap Rock Escarpment, and you can see it plainly when you're driving from Oklahoma City off into the Panhandle from the east. The elevation increases here right along this sort of ridge here from Amarillo down to Lubbock down to Midland, Odessa. And when you get southeasterly or easterly flow going up that uh, caprock escarpment, you get, as you do with air going up, forced upward over a mountain, you get rising motion. And when you have ample dew points, adequate dew points like we have today, that moisture can pool there, and you get upward motion. And oftentimes, otherwise sort of marginal thermodynamic setups across this region, when you get southeasterly flow or easterly flow going up that caprock escarpment, uh, it sort of enhances the upward motion, and you get maybe a greater chance for storm formation than the sort of ambient setup would suggest otherwise. So those factors, I think, are going to help us overcome the elevated mixed layer today and help us get storms in the absence of any notable synoptic scale forcing. Let's take a look at some soundings now. We'll start with Amarillo, north of the front. Keep in mind this is north of the warm front. So we see surface temperatures of 47 here. You can tell that it's north of the front. Pretty decent inversion there at the surface. But a very stout elevated mixed layer there, very steep lapse rates aloft here in Amarillo. And if we go down to Midland, Odessa, kind of the same thing. Very stout elevated mixed layer. This is south of the warm front. Temperature of 62 here in Midland. Very stout, very steep lapse rates here in this layer from about 500 millibars all the way down to about 850. Very steep lapse rates here. Definitely a potent EML. So it's kind of on the fringes here. This cap is very, very strong. We see a convective temperature of 86 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the temperature that needs to be reached here to allow surface parcels to breach that cap and have the cap not be an issue. In the absence of large-scale synoptic forcing and relying on mostly mesoscale forcing, are we going to get storms to break? Are we going to get enough forcing to break this stout cap? It's still in question. And some of the models are showing a lack of storm activity during the day because of this capping inversion here across the Texas Panhandle. But some of the models are not. Some of the models are showing storms firing. I think because of that combination of our southeasterly, easterly flow up the caprock and sort of that enhanced forcing from the warm front dry line sort of triple point there. So we'll see. The HRRR is showing quite a few storms here across the Texas Panhandle later this afternoon. I might be a little skeptical of that because of the degree of this elevated mixed layer here. It's going to take quite a bit to break this cap. We might have to wait until after dark until a little bit better forcing arrives. That trough just starts to eject a little bit into the plains, but as far as moisture quality here, pretty shallow moist layer here at Midland. A little bit drier air above that. Again, this is a very stout EML, so very stout, very deep EML here. Very kind of shallow moist layer below that. If we go down to Del Rio, a little bit deeper of a moist layer here. But again, we see that EML aloft, very stout EML aloft. And but this sort of a slightly deeper moist layer going to be advecting to the north a little bit on that southeasterly flow. We have, that southwesterly flow across the region as we saw on our satellite image. That's going to promote sort of weak lee cyclogenesis to the lee side of the Rockies here, which will keep that southerly flow in place today across Texas. So the low-level winds should be fairly favorable for using the caprock to the best of its ability and continuing that moisture transport to the north throughout the day. So let's go ahead and take a look at a few short-range models here. This is the NAM 500 millibar map here. We can see our trough located over Southern California. You can see it doesn't really eject much throughout the day today until after dark it starts to eject. This is the 12Z run just coming in as I record this, hot off the presses. But you can see it doesn't move a whole lot throughout the day. And we're kind of still stuck in this sort of middle ground between the ridging to the east and this troughiness, this trough ejecting into the plains. We're kind of in that sort of transition area here. We do see a little bit just persistent. We do see persistent southwesterly flow and a little bit of an enhancement of the winds aloft, which could act to help in terms of synoptic scale forcing today. But as far as shortwave troughs rotating around this, not really seeing much in the way of that. We see a little bit of one here early. It's going to light up some storms along to the north of the warm front late this morning into early afternoon. But again, not a whole lot in terms of shortwaves here for this afternoon and evening batch of storms until we start to get that trough to approach and start to eject into the plains after dark. Low-level jet should be, I would think it's going to be relatively weak throughout the day since we don't have significant surface cyclogenesis ongoing. That's going to wait until tomorrow. We do see some semblance of it, 20 knots or so across the Panhandle, and then after dark it starts to increase a little bit as you start to get a more significant cyclogenesis, the typical nocturnal increase in the low-level jet. So it looks like the parameters, the environment is going to become a little bit more favorable after dark, after sunset, for severe storms. But again, we could see enough forcing from that dry line, from along that triple point, and from the cap rock to get storms to go. This is an oddity that I've seen in the models here. You can see the warm front here, dry line. This little strange bulge here in the warm front where you have sort of a lack of sort of instability, this kind of wave in the warm front. I'm not quite sure what that is, and it's really odd to me. That could be an issue for storms traversing this area. They fire out here along the dry line in the southwest Texas Panhandle, Texas South Plains. If this is true, this might be an issue as storms try to traverse this. You might need to go a little bit farther south here to the southwest of Childress here, so you can to get along that front. That's just an oddity I've seen in multiple models, so I'm not quite sure what that is. But as far as the general pattern goes, you can see the dry line here, fairly well established dry line. Sort of this warm frontal boundary. You can see how much it lifts north throughout the day, and then it kind of stalls out by early evening here from about Oklahoma City, Tulsa to about Oklahoma City, down toward Childress, and discounting this bulge down to about Lubbock. Let's take a look at the HRRR here. We'll go through some short-range guidance here, and the HRRR has been extremely bullish on convection here. You can see where that dry line sort of front is, little storms north of the front during the morning hours, early afternoon. And then you get storms to fire along that dry line, sort of right at that triple point, by about 4 o'clock Central Standard Time. And then we get multiple supercells here looks like they kind of ride that warm front. Pretty significant helicity streaks there. So the HRRR definitely bullish on convection, and that continues after dark here. Multiple storms here all the way down toward Midland, Odessa, up toward Childress into southwest and west Oklahoma after dark, and then kind of lines out, comes clustery after dark. So if we look at the HRRR here, we'll pull a sounding, see how it looks ahead of these storms. This is the 6Z. Let's go to the 12Z run, actually. You can see right there, that was the 6Z run. The HRRR has been pretty adamant, pretty consistent about these storms here in the Texas Panhandle this afternoon. We'll take a sounding just in the inflow region of the storm. Nice unstable profile, a little bit of an inversion here. Whether or not that's real, it could be a model quirk, could be legitimate. Still yet to be seen, but you can see some effect of that enhancement of the low-level jet here. In the low levels here, photographs enlarged toward evening, 0 to 1 SRH 235 here, effective inflow, SRH of 339, so more than adequate for supercells with potentially a tornado threat. If this little inversion, if it's real, can be overcome, storms riding along that warm front should have a chance of producing a tornado or two, given the enhanced helicity along that boundary. I think definitely large hail is going to be in play with the steep lapse rates aloft, as we saw on our morning soundings. Very steep lapse rates will promote large hail, perhaps very large hail with these storms today. Let's take a look at some of the other models. The 12Z runs of the other cams are just coming in. So for time's sake, we'll use the 0Z runs from last night. This is the Worf Arw model. We can see here, this model not showing much throughout the day. Right about 5, 6 o'clock, we start to get storm formation along to the south of that warm front. And then after sunset, we really get to the storms to start firing down there. You can see some semblance of supercells down here near to the southwest of Childress. So pretty much the same, just a little bit delayed. Might be some capping concerns being picked up by this model. This is the NSSL Worf here. And much of the same story. Not much throughout the day. Then by about 0Z, we get storms to start forming, riding that warm front, potential for supercells here after dark. So I'm a little bit skeptical about the HRRR and having this much convection during the day with sort of an increase by 0Z. Is that forcing along the dry line warm front triple point going to be enough to overcome the stout EML aloft? We'll see. We'll see. Really, that large scale forcing, like we said, not really there. So we're going to have to rely on that triple point, on that dry line forcing, on that cap rock to help us get storms here during the daylight hours. But definitely a possibility. I definitely think this is a environment definitely capable of producing some potentially significant supercells. At the very least, I think we're going to see a few storms, whether or not it's during the day or after dark. I think we're going to see a few storms, a few supercells with the capability of producing very large hail, damaging winds, and maybe a tornado or two if a storm can ride that warm front. So if you're in this slight risk region from western Oklahoma down toward the I-27 corridor, I believe, Amarillo to Lubbock, particularly from about Lubbock to Childress to Altus to Lawton, that area going to be most under the gun right along that warm front for the potential for the most potent supercells there. If you're in these regions, stay weather aware today. Tomorrow, we're going to have another chance at severe storms. We'll try to do another video like this tomorrow morning regarding that, but there is a tornado threat tomorrow, as well as a damaging wind and hail threat with storms in the Texas Panhandle, northwest Texas, into western Oklahoma tomorrow. So, but as for today, for those of you chasing, personally, I'd probably pick a target from about Abernathy to Plainview and a little bit east of there to start, and just work my way to the northeast along that warm front as the afternoon and evening progress. I think that's going to be your best bet for tornadic supercells today. If you're chasing today, stay safe. If you're in these areas, if you live in these areas, stay weather aware today. And that's all I've got for this morning. So thanks for watching, and we will see you on the next storm.